We're going to begin in Esther chapter 7. That's right, we're finally moving forward. Esther chapter 7, we'll begin in verse 2. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to half of the kingdom. Then Esther answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, and my people to be destroyed and slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and women, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther, the queen, Who is he, and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, Thine adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king arose from the banquet of wine in his wrath and went into the palace garden. And Haman stood to make a request for his life to Queen Esther, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the king's chamberlains, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, stand in the house of Haman. Then said the king, Hang him thereon. So they hanged him on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Remember, Esther was not in a hurry. She invited the king and Haman to not one, but two banquets, and she made her request known. The king's response is recorded for us in verse 2. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to half of the kingdom. Esther makes the king ask her what it is that she wants. In the first case, when she goes before him and he holds out the golden scepter, Haman isn't there. And I would suppose that when she makes this accusation, she wants Haman to be there, because if not, maybe the king will speak to him privately, and maybe he can come up with some way to save his skin. So she wants to be there when that conversation takes place. The second time the king asks is at the first banquet, and again, she wants to show the king that love and that deference and that respect. And here we have the third time when she makes that request. And the king asks her what it is that she wants. This actually tells us a lot about the king. Think about things in your own life. If someone is upset about something, how much do you enjoy prying what they're upset out of them for? When someone's upset and we say, Hey, what's wrong? And they say, Nothing. We say, Well, you're obviously upset. No. Well, if you tell me, maybe I can do something about it. Everything's fine. Part of being a pastor is knowing what to say and when to say it. And you know as well as I do, when you're at a funeral or when you're in a hospital, you can't greet people with the normal question that you would greet people with. When you're at a funeral, it's a very poor question to say, How are you? And it's the same in the hospital. When you walk in the hospital and say, How are you? They say, Never been better. And you? But you know as I do that people have degrees of answering that question, How are you, on a Sunday morning. There's good, there's okay, there's fine, and then there's bad. But we never say that because we know the person who's asking the question usually is just using it as a greeting. And what they're meaning to say is hello, not tell me about how terrible your week has been. How many times have you been there? Have you asked someone, How are you? When you really did just mean hello? We have to be careful to ask questions that we actually want the answer to. We should, if we ask a question, listen for the answer. But what else do we do many times in conversation? We ask a question, and once they begin answering that question, we're already 3 sentences ahead of them, thinking of what they're going to say so that we know how to respond. Another thing that happens oftentimes in conversation, particularly with men, is the one-upsmanship, so to speak. Someone says, Yeah, the other day I was climbing my tree stand 75 feet tall. And then someone, of course, remembers how they had a tree stand that was 100 feet tall. And then another person remembers how they had a tree stand that was 200 feet tall, and it was a whole camper they put up there. And the story seems to keep growing a little bit larger as each person tells what had happened in their life. We want to be careful when we're having conversations, obviously not to do that. I found myself in that sort of conversation where I've contributed to that conversation. I've literally said inside of my own head, why did you say that? Like, dude, you don't even care. But so many times we get caught up in something like that. A lost skill today is actually the art of listening. When I was at the dealership, I had a situation happen that was just wrong. They had put a lady with a child in a 23,000-mile Altima, and you'd say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, they sent her home to Panama City. You'd say, okay, so it's a 2.5-hour drive. Well, it was a tropical storm. You say, all right, but it's a 23,000-mile Altima, Steve. What could be possibly wrong with that? It had 4 bald tires on it. So I went to the office where the manager sat, the general manager, the used car manager, the new car manager. I very calmly and politely closed the door, and I proceeded to berate them for allowing that to happen. They said, you're right, Steve. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Just go put some tires on the car. So I did. But about 30 minutes later, I realized that when I went in that office, I was legitimately furious. And it takes a lot to get me to that level of upset. So I went back in the office, and I closed the door, and I said, hey. They said, what? I said, I came in here about 30 minutes ago. They said, we recall. I said, I was really angry. They said, we know. I said, I wasn't angry when I left here. They said, yes. I said, how'd you do that? The first answer they gave me is one that I full well should have known, because it's actually what the Bible says. What does the Bible say? A soft answer turns away wrath. They said, you came in here and you were angry and you were standing. Do you know what we did? I said, tell me. They said, we stayed in our seats. We didn't meet you in standing. They said, we didn't meet your level of volume. We spoke calmly. I said, okay. Fair enough. Should have known that one. But they also said this. They said, we listened to you. You see, most of the time when someone is upset, what they want to feel is they want to feel heard. Now, hearing them and saying that you'll do something and doing the opposite of that, or speaking out of both sides of your mouth, hearing them and telling them what they want to hear, and then the guy who comes in behind them what he wants to hear, and doing neither of those things isn't actually hearing someone. If you hear someone and you disagree with them, you have to communicate that reasonably. But I left that office and I really learned a couple of things. And time again, I used those 2 principles and took people who had murder in their eyes to understanding and accepting the situation. When we're talking to others, others want to know that we are hearing them, that we're actually listening to them. The king cared about Esther. He wanted to know what was upsetting her so much that the king was willing to ask her 3 times. Praise God, she stopped at 3, because I'm not sure he would have asked the 4th. But do you care enough about people to ask them how they're doing and actually care for the answer, actually listen to the answer? We know that there's a decision to make even after that. So we decide, I'm going to ask this person how they're doing. I'm going to listen. I'm going to care about what's going on in their life. But then we have another decision to make. When they tell us what's going on in their life, we still have another fork in the road, so to speak. For ladies, a lot of times when they tell us what's going on in their life, they just want to share the experience and they want us to empathize with them, and they don't many times want us to provide a solution. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they just, again, want to feel heard and like someone understands where they're coming from. With fellas, usually it's the opposite. Usually you can cut us off halfway through the sentence and say, here's $5, shut up and fix it, and we're good to go, right? But that's another decision that we have to make. We have to know who it is that we're talking to and what it is that we can do to actually hear them, to actually listen to them, to actually help them. Obviously here, Queen Esther's problem requires action on the king's part. The king asked, he listened, and then he acted. Imagine if the king had said, as Esther came in and said, you know, I'm going to die, they're going to murder me and all of my people. And then the king had said, oh, yeah, I remember a time when I had it really rough too. Oh, well, tell me, king, what was that like? Well, I was out racing Dad's chariot and I wrecked it and I thought Dad was going to kill me. But we've all been there, and sometimes we're that person. Esther had a sincere problem on her heart, and the king listened to her problem, the king heard her problem, and then the king acted appropriately according to what he heard. We need to love each other enough to really listen, and we need to be willing to help each other when it's appropriate. The king took action. What action did he take? There are actually a lot of actions that we're going to see over the next few chapters. The first one, obviously, we see is that Haman is hung on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. To me, God's timing is really interesting to consider. And what Mordecai and Esther did is really interesting to consider, I think. I think it's important for us to note that they didn't quit. When things went from bad to worse to even worse, when Esther is about to have her second banquet and she still hasn't made the request yet and the gallows are going up in the backyard, this is not a good thing. But they didn't quit. Something else they didn't do, and again, this is something that you and I do all the time. When things went from bad to worse to even worse, they didn't quit, but they also didn't come up with their own scheme. Well, I mean, I know you had the first banquet and everything went well, so if you poison him this time, nobody will suspect it's you. No, they didn't come up with their own scheme. They waited on God. When we're doing what's right and time passes and things seem to go from bad to worse, when we don't see God working, many times we begin scheming, we begin planning. Or we begin building ourselves up to quit. I'm taking my toys and going home. But Mordecai and Esther didn't quit, and they didn't come up with their own plan. They prayed and they followed the protocol for dealing with this exact situation. Things kept getting worse. Esther had thrown her first banquet. Now the gallows are being built. Come on, Esther. I might be swinging before you finish the second banquet. I'm spending so much time on this point because in real life we spend a lot of time in this place. One of my friends made the most wise statement I think I've ever heard. I'm going to break the statement up and give it to you all at the end. The statement starts with this: a short time. We can look at the decree that was made. We can see that they fasted, and we can come up with the idea that from the time that they fasted to the time that Haman is swinging in the backyard, it seems like what we have there, it's about a week. Have you ever been there? The statement is this: a short time feels like forever until it's over. Think about it. For any Jew alive during that week, this week felt like an entire lifetime. Sometimes I feel like in one day I live a whole lifetime. There's so much joy in one day, and then so much grief in one day, and so much turmoil in one day, and so much blessing in one day, that it's hard to believe all this has happened and only 16 hours have passed. The decree's been made. They're praying, they're fasting. They see the gallows being built. It feels like they've been waiting on God for an eternity. And many times in our life, it can feel the same way. The time of testing, the time of pain, it feels like it's lasting forever. It feels like it's never going to end. It feels like it's going to come to catastrophe before God fixes the problem. But then, just as quickly as the problem came into our life, I mean, really think about it. One day everything's going well. That afternoon, Haman says, let's murder all the Jews. And the king's like, that's cool. Just as quickly as the problem happened, God solves the problem. And that 1 week of our life, that months of our life, even if it were years of our life spent in consternation and prayer, wondering what God's doing, begging God, crying to God, praying ourselves to sleep, and God answered in a way that only the creator of the universe did and could. And now that that time is over, it feels like the blink of an eye. I sincerely believe when we get to heaven, when we enter into eternity, the time we spent on earth, even if it were 100 years, will feel like a second in relation to eternity. And I sincerely believe if we're able to reflect on our time on earth, which I think we will be able to for a very short time period, and I think if we're able to reflect on our time period on earth, we'll ask ourselves, why? It was such a short time, and I couldn't go without comfort. I couldn't go without ease. I couldn't go without toys. I couldn't go without wanting to fit in. Why did I chase after this thing? Why did I waste my 1 second on that? I think for a time we'll be in deep regret, but then I know that Jesus will wipe our tears away and we'll enter into the joy of the Lord if we're saved. But I think so many times, because life feels like it lasts for forever, we just keep putting things off. We say, I know I need to be a better soul winner, but I'll do that tomorrow, or I'll do that later, or I know I need to spend more time in prayer, but I'll do that later. I mean, I know I've been struggling with this sin for a few years now, but I'll get this sin out of my life later. I really can't do it right now. I know I need to give more. I'll give more later. And I think we take for granted how short this life actually is. And I think for a time, we'll regret not having done better. A short time feels like forever until it's over. For the Jews, for Mordecai, for Esther, I'm sure this short time seemed like forever. I'm sure it seemed like it would never end. I'm sure it seemed like the Lord wasn't listening to their praying and fasting. I'm sure it seemed like nothing was going to happen, but then God began working. And God does some amazing things. Let's look at Esther chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. The king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. All those people, you remember we talked about them, Zeresh, his wife, all of his friends who gave him that counsel, they're now feeling the pain of their bad advice. Now his wife, now his family, now his children have nothing. There's something you can pray for me about. It's maybe a little bit personal, but I'll let you in on this piece of struggle. I think a good man, when he dies, his wife will be taken care of. And I think if he has children and he dies, then his kids will be taken care of. You see, I believe, according to Scripture, it's a man's job to provide. That's what Paul told Timothy. But if any provide not for his own house, if any provide not for his own, and especially those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. I believe a man should provide for his family. I believe if a man dies, his wife should be taken care of. When I worked at the dealership, I had a $750,000 policy on myself and a $500 million policy on my wife, and now I have nothing. I believe it's my job, even if I'm dead, to provide for my family. Put that aside. I have more respect for two men than I can even be capable of articulating. The first one is my wife's grandfather. He was in the Air Force, and he had an entire Air Force career, and then he got saved. When he got saved, he was called to be a missionary, and he went to college, and he became a missionary. As a missionary, not one penny that was ever given to him paid for any of his needs. His retirement from the military paid for all of that. It paid for his car, it paid for his house, it paid for his plane tickets. So every penny that was ever given to him actually went to the people and to the ministry. He never even took a salary. He had his own, he paid for himself. But the thing that impresses me the most, well, that impresses me a lot, and I think that's pretty cool, was when he died. For years and years and years, his wife lacked for nothing. If she needed a car, she could pick which dealership she wanted to go to. It didn't matter which one, and she could point and say, that one. If there was something wrong with the house, a plumber could be called, an electrician could be called. She could buy a whole new house if she felt like it, because he had taken care of her, even though he wasn't alive. And the second is my grandfather, Floyd. He has done such a good job that Grandma Pearl lacks for nothing, even though he's passed. I believe a good man will see the future and do what he can to make sure that his wife and children are provided for. And here's the thing. You say, how does this have to do with our lesson? Well, think about Haman. Haman had provided for many generations, but he made a mistake. He let his pride and his anger not only hurt him, not only cost him his life, but his wife and his children, all that he had laid up for them, now belongs to another man. Now, we'll see in the future that his children die in battle and that Esther has their dead bodies hanged. But everything that Haman had laid up for the future isn't there anymore. When we sin, when we act irrationally, we have no idea how many generations can be affected by one decision. I'm sure Haman didn't realize what he was about to cost 2 or 3 generations. Haman left a legacy, and we've talked about that before. A legacy is not what you leave in relation to finances, but how you got it. If you leave $6 million, but you gained it by robbing widows and orphans, then robbing widows and orphans is the legacy. If you die penniless in a ditch, then whatever caused you to be penniless in a ditch is your legacy. The greatest way that I believe we can leave a good legacy is to sincerely treat people the way that Jesus did. When it comes to dealing with people, there are a couple of verses I try to keep in my mind, particularly in relation to leaving a legacy. And the first you can quote, I guarantee it, Matthew 7:12. It's also recorded in Mark, if my memory serves correctly. Therefore, all things, whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so for them. For this is the law and the prophets. The devil is so slippery. The devil has made a counterfeit version of this, and it's found in almost every religion that the devil invented. Again, I want to point out that the devil invents religions. Religions keep people from God. The definition of religion is man trying to meet man, or man trying to meet God man's way. The devil wants people to think that they can earn their way to heaven. He wants them to think that they can do good things and please God, and that somehow the good things they do will please God enough that they won't have to spend eternity in hell. And the devil knows while he's convincing of that they're going straight to hell, because the devil knows their good works will never outweigh their bad works. What we believe is not a religion. We believe that we can't make it to God, that we can't earn salvation. We believe that the only way to heaven is the way that God's provided, which is through the shed blood of his son on the cross. So every other religion was made by the devil, and it's a counterfeit to send people to hell. But each one of those religions has a counterfeit of this principle that we reference as the golden rule. But the devil's counterfeit sets the bar so very low. You see, in his religions, the devil says it this way: don't do to people what you don't want done to you. And while that sounds great, like, if you don't want to be murdered, don't murder people. If you don't want to be robbed, don't rob people. If you don't want somebody to take advantage of you, don't take advantage of people. Like, that sounds great, but it's a pretty low bar. See, God has a much higher standard. God includes that low bar, but God says this: therefore all things, whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Not only don't do what you don't want done to you, but do what you would like done. For instance, as Paul said to the church at Ephesus, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor with his hands, that he may have to give to them that needeth. Not only don't steal, but labor so you can give. Not only don't hurt someone, but physically exert yourself so that you can meet someone's need the way that you would want your need to be met. If you're going to leave a positive legacy, you need to do your best not only not to hurt people, but to treat people the way that you wanted to be treated. The next set of verses are Matthew 25, 34 down to 46. I think this is another set of verses that, if we apply correctly to life, helps us to leave the proper sort of legacy. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came to me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took we in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? The king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these my brethren, you've done it unto me. Then he shall also say to them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Well, why is that? For I was hungered, and ye gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me not in. Naked, and ye clothed me not. Sick, and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then also they shall answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to thee? Then he shall answer them, saying, Verily, insomuch as ye did not to the least of these, yet ye did it not to me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. How we treat people who can do absolutely nothing for us tells us a lot about us. You see, the Bible makes it so very clear that we're self-centered. I shared this with the men on Monday night. What does the Bible tell us? It says, we love him because he first loved us. We're so self-centered that if Jesus didn't take the first step, if he didn't do something for us, we'd have no cause to even think of him. If God didn't love us first, we sure wouldn't love him. And most of what we do as human beings, we're looking for some level of reciprocation. When we help someone in their time of need, a small part of us is hoping that if we're in a time of need that they'll help us, or maybe they did help us when we were in a time of need, so we feel a level of indebted and obligation to them. Just talking about helping people who can do nothing for you, who have no way of repaying you. If you want to leave the proper sort of legacy, do unto others as you want done unto you. If you want to leave a legacy, do for those who can do nothing for you. See, here's the thing. Haman did not leave a legacy. He left a legacy. We're talking about it to this day. Haman left a legacy of pride and of arrogance. Let's be real. Let's suppose just a little bit. Now, there's some time gap from the time that Haman is hanged till the time that his children die in battle, and then they're hanged. There's some time gap there. So to me, that means that mom has to explain what happened to dad. Now, maybe the kids are old enough. Maybe they know already what happened. Or maybe mom has to explain. Now, let's be real. What is mom going to say happened to dad? In real life, I guarantee you, mom says it's the Jews. Those nasty people are the reason why your dad's dead. And those kids grow up hating the Jews. You see, Haman left a legacy. His next generation is going to think something about what happened to him. Her sons probably, I would guess, grew up looking for revenge. Had she told them the truth, she would have said, your daddy let his pride and his anger get the best of him, and now we're at the mercy of Queen Esther and Mordecai. How did the king respond after he listened to Esther? First, the king took action. When he listened to Esther's petition, he went and he hung Haman on the gallows for Mordecai, and then he gave Esther Haman's estate, 8 verse 1 and 2. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Queen Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told him what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. The king hung Haman on his own gallows. He gave Haman's house to Esther, but it doesn't stop there. He took the ring off Haman's hand, which symbolized the authority that he had. You remember the authority he was bragging about to all of his friends. They've set me above everybody else. I'm the second in the kingdom. He took that ring with that authority and he put it on Mordecai's hand. Now, everyone in everyone in Haman's house, his servants, anyone who was indebted to Haman, now has to answer to Mordecai. Things kept getting worse. Mordecai and Esther kept doing their best to obey the Lord, to have faith in God. And things kept looking worse. But then God began to work, and God is setting things right. God is now avenging his people. I want to be careful tonight not to promise you that things will work out in your life this way. You see, things might get bad, and they might get worse. And they might keep getting worse until you pass from life through death into the next life. But I can promise you, if the Lord doesn't set things right here, that when you get to heaven, as the songwriter put it, it will be worth it all when we see Jesus. Life's trials will seem so small when we see Christ. One glimpse of his dear face, all sorrow will erase. Please note, no matter what you're going through, the Lord isn't done yet. The Lord is just beginning to show his faithfulness to his people as we look at this in Esther. And the Lord will show his faithfulness to us if we keep doing what's right. If we keep trusting and obeying, as the song says.